Automation doesn't make companies cheaper, it makes them harder to save. That is the inversion at the center of AI adoption, and most organizations don't see it until it's too late. Because when firms invest in automation, they believe they are increasing control over cost. They believe they are making their expense base more efficient, more scalable, more responsive. But what they are actually doing is something much more structural. They are converting cost from something that moves into something that stays, from something that responds into something that resists. This is cost stickiness. Before automation, cost breathes. A company can slow hiring, reduce contractor hours, pause external work, defer projects, adjust capacity in response to demand. Not perfectly, but enough to protect margins. Cost is imperfectly elastic. It moves. After automation, that movement begins to disappear because the cost is no longer tied to human effort. It is tied to system existence. And systems do not scale down cleanly. They persist. To see how this actually works, take a simple operational shift. A company replaces a portion of its customer support function with AI. Before automation, cost is directly tied to activity. If ticket volume drops, fewer agents are needed. Hours decline. Spend declines. The relationship is not perfect, but it is directional. After automation, that relationship breaks. The system is no longer just labor. It is a stack: model inference costs, API usage, routing layers, data pipelines, storage, monitoring, fallback systems, vendor contracts. Now, if ticket volume drops by 30 or even 50%, the system does not shrink proportionally, because most of that stack does not scale linearly with usage. The infrastructure remains, the integrations remain, the contracts remain. The system continues to cost money, whether it is fully utilized or not. That is the structural shift. Cost is no longer proportional to output. It becomes anchored to architecture, and architecture does not move quickly. This creates the first economic tension. Revenue can decline immediately. Cost does not. That gap is where pressure begins. In traditional systems, cost follows demand with lag. In automated systems, cost often decouples entirely. Because the system has a minimum operating threshold, it cannot exist below a certain level of spend. Even at low utilization, it must be maintained, observed, updated, paid for. So the organization inherits a new constraint. It cannot fully contract. The system can grow. It cannot retreat. This is the moment where efficiency turns into rigidity. Because cost flexibility, the ability to reduce expense under pressure, is one of the primary stabilizers in any business system. Automation weakens that stabilizer, and when it weakens, volatility becomes more dangerous. Small declines in revenue translate into disproportionately large impacts on margin. Because cost remains fixed while revenue moves, operational leverage reverses. Instead of amplifying growth, it amplifies decline. This is why automated systems often appear highly efficient in expansion and unexpectedly fragile in contraction. Now, there is a persistent narrative that automation always improves efficiency. But efficiency is not just about lowering cost. It is about responsiveness. It is about how quickly a system can adapt to changing conditions. There is an important distinction. Traditional automation often reduced cost stickiness because it replaced labor, which is itself difficult to adjust. But modern AI systems introduce a different form of rigidity. They replace labor with infrastructure. And infrastructure does not move. Because automation embeds decisions into infrastructure. Once a system is deployed, it is no longer fluid. Changing it requires engineering effort, retraining, validation, testing, redeployment, sometimes renegotiation with external vendors. So organizations delay change. They tolerate inefficiencies. They accept higher cost for longer periods than they would in a purely human system. This delay is not a management failure. It is structural, because infrastructure changes slower than behavior, and that delay compounds into cost, because automation introduces accumulation. Every system adds layers: monitoring, logging, fallback mechanisms, redundancy systems, integration points. Each layer introduces cost, but more importantly, each layer introduces dependency, and dependency makes removal harder. Over time, the cost base stabilizes, not at zero, but at a persistent level. This is why firms often experience a plateau after automation. They expect cost to continuously decline. Instead, cost flattens, or even increases, because maintenance and complexity expand alongside the system. But there is a deeper effect. As cost becomes structural, decision-making begins to invert. Instead of adjusting cost to match strategy, firms begin adjusting strategy to justify cost. Systems that are expensive to maintain are kept active. Capacity is filled to absorb fixed expense. Utilization becomes a defensive goal rather than an economic one. This is where stickiness turns into distortion. Automation does not just fix cost in place, it starts to shape behavior around that fixed cost. Automation does not eliminate cost, it transforms it. From visible labor expense to embedded system expense, from adjustable to persistent. And persistence changes behavior, because once a system becomes embedded, the organization reorganizes around it. Workflows depend on it. Decisions assume it. Outputs rely on it. Removing it is no longer a financial adjustment. It becomes an operational disruption. So even when reducing cost is economically rational, it is resisted organizationally, because the system is no longer optional. It is foundational. This deepens cost stickiness, because now cost is embedded in two places, in infrastructure and in behavior. And behavior changes slower than budgets. There is another layer: vendor dependency. Most AI systems are not fully owned. They rely on external providers, Model APIs, cloud infrastructure, data services. These relationships introduce contractual inertia, minimum commitments, pricing tiers, usage thresholds, switching costs. You cannot exit instantly. You cannot renegotiate instantly. So cost remains, even when demand declines. And attempting to reduce cost introduces new cost: migration cost, reintegration cost, performance uncertainty, operational risk. So firms delay, they defer, they stay, and the system continues. Over time, this produces a structural asymmetry. Scaling up becomes easier, scaling down becomes harder, and that asymmetry changes how the entire organization behaves. It biases decision-making toward expansion, because expansion is frictionless, but contraction becomes painful, because contraction requires structural change. This is the deeper consequence of automation. It does not just change cost levels, it changes cost behavior, and cost behavior determines how a firm responds under stress. In growth environments, automated systems look superior. They scale efficiently, they expand margins, they reduce incremental cost. But in contraction environments, those same systems reveal their rigidity. They hold cost in place. They resist reduction. They amplify pressure. This is the trade-off. Automation exchanges flexibility for scale, fluidity for structure, adaptability for efficiency, And that exchange is not neutral. It reshapes the entire economic profile of the firm. Early adoption hides this, because the initial phase focuses on cost reduction. But maturity reveals it, because the system begins to persist, and persistence is where economic pressure accumulates. This is the final shift. Cost no longer follows decisions. Decisions follow cost. Because once cost becomes structural, it stops responding. And when cost stops responding, the system loses its ability to adjust. And when the system cannot adjust, it cannot protect itself. Automation does not remove cost. It removes your ability to escape it.